Simone, a tall black woman in her mid-40s, took her seat in economy class near the window. A dark, tailored suit gives her an air of quiet authority. "Excuse me," she said politely to a passing flight attendant named Claire. Claire, in her perfectly pressed uniform and forced smile, barely acknowledged her. "I'll be with you in a moment," Claire said flatly, moving to assist another passenger without a second glance. Once the flight was in the air, the tension didn't fade. Claire pushed the beverage cart down the aisle, her smile warm and engaging for some passengers but cold and dismissive for others. When she reached Simone's row, Claire paused, glanced at her briefly, and skipped over her entirely. Simone waited for a moment, then said calmly, "Could I get a bottle of water, please?" Claire stopped, but didn't meet her gaze. "We're out," she replied curtly, before moving on to the next row. Moments later, Simone watched as Claire handed a bottle of water to another passenger just across the aisle. Simone's jaw tightened, but she stayed silent. She wasn't one to react impulsively. Around her, a few passengers exchanged awkward glances, whispering to each other. They had noticed the interaction, but no one said a word. Simone leaned back in her seat, her face unreadable. She wasn't just any passenger. This was her airline. And while Claire might not realize it yet, Simone had seen enough to know this was more than bad customer service. It was personal. And things were about to change. Simone remained silent, her calm exterior masking the storm brewing inside her. She had faced subtle discrimination before, but this felt blatant. Too blatant to ignore. She observed Claire as the flight attendant moved down the aisle, her demeanor noticeably warmer toward other passengers. The contrast was impossible to miss. The tension in the cabin began to shift. A few passengers whispered among themselves, glancing toward Simone with curiosity and unease. A man sitting across the aisle leaned toward his wife. "Did you see that? She's been skipping her the whole time," he murmured. Simone caught the glance but didn't react. Instead, she took out a small notebook from her bag, jotting something down in neat, deliberate handwriting. It wasn't an impulsive gesture. Everything Simone did carried intention. Meanwhile, Claire continued her service, her professional smile faltering slightly as she noticed the growing murmurs. She seemed irritated, though she kept her tone cheerful for others. As she walked past Simone's row again, Simone raised her hand slightly. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady and polite. "I'd like to know when the snack service will begin." Claire stopped, her expression cold. "We're not serving snacks yet," she said curtly. Her voice was louder than necessary, as if she wanted the surrounding passengers to hear. Simone simply nodded, her face unreadable. "Thank you," she replied softly. The exchange caught the attention of a middle-aged woman sitting a few rows behind. She frowned and leaned toward another passenger. "That's just rude," she whispered. "Why is she treating her like that?" Claire walked away briskly, pretending not to notice the murmurs. Her chest tightened as she felt the weight of the passengers' stares, but she dismissed it. "It's just another economy-class passenger," she muttered to herself. Simone, however, wasn't an ordinary passenger. She leaned back in her seat, quietly observing Claire's every move. Simone had worked for years to climb the ranks of this very airline, breaking barriers and earning respect in a field where few black women held positions of power. But she had never forgotten moments like this, moments that reminded her of the hurdles she had to overcome. Half an hour later, the cabin settled into a lull as passengers dozed off or scrolled through their devices. Claire returned to the galley at the back of the plane, her irritation barely concealed. One of her colleagues, a younger attendant named Mia, noticed Claire's tense expression. "Everything okay?" Mia asked cautiously. Claire shrugged, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "Fine, just dealing with some difficult passengers." Mia tilted her head. "Which row?" Claire gestured vaguely toward the middle of the cabin. "Seat 14A. She's demanding and has this attitude." "You type." Mia frowned but didn't respond. She had noticed the interaction earlier and hadn't thought Simone was being difficult at all. In fact, Mia had found Claire's tone unnecessarily harsh, but she didn't want to argue. Back in her seat, Simone opened her phone discreetly, connecting to the airline's in-flight Wi-Fi. She navigated to her email inbox and began typing a message. It was concise but powerful, detailing the behavior she had observed. Attached to the email was a short note for the airline's operations team, a note that would make its way directly to her assistant. The subject line read, "Immediate review required. Flight attendant conduct." Simone didn't hit send right away. Instead, she stared at the screen for a moment, her mind replaying the moments of subtle dismissal. She could feel the quiet discomfort of the passengers around her, the weight of being the subject of hushed conversations. But this wasn't about her pride. It was about accountability. She clicked send. Meanwhile, Claire was oblivious to the unfolding storm. She continued her duties, her confidence growing as the tension in the cabin seemed to ease. But the growing unease among the passengers was hard to miss, and Simone's calm demeanor had begun to feel unnerving. It wasn't over. Not yet. The flight carried on, the steady hum of the engines filling the cabin. Simone remained composed, her hands resting on her lap as she gazed out the window, but her mind was sharp and focused, replaying every moment of Claire's dismissive behavior. She wasn't angry. She was strategic. Moments like these required precision, not impulse. Claire, however, seemed oblivious to the shifting atmosphere. She walked the aisles with a forced smile, but her tone remained clipped and dismissive whenever she passed Simone. The tension was palpable now, with several passengers throwing Claire questioning looks. Others whispered among themselves, their discomfort growing. As Claire reached the galley again, Mia, the younger flight attendant, hesitated before speaking. "Hey, Claire," she began cautiously. "I think there's something going on with the passenger in 14A. Claire raised an eyebrow. "What about her?" "Well," Mia said, lowering her voice, "I noticed you've been skipping her. A few passengers have noticed too. Maybe we should—" "She's been difficult," Claire interrupted sharply. "Demanding water, asking for snacks before service. She's clearly just trying to cause trouble." Mia frowned. "I don't think she's being difficult. She's been polite every time I've seen her." "Maybe we should—" Claire rolled her eyes. "Mia, trust me. I know her type. Just leave it alone." Mia hesitated, but Claire's dismissive tone silenced her. Something didn't feel right, but Mia wasn't sure what to do. Meanwhile, Simone quietly observed from her seat. Her email had already reached the airline's executive operations team, and the response had been swift. A notification popped up on her phone, indicating that her assistant had escalated the matter to the flight's pilot. Just as Simone leaned back, the flight intercom crackled to life. The captain's calm voice echoed through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We hope you're enjoying your flight. I'd like to extend a special welcome to a very important passenger joining us today. Simone Wallace, the CEO of our airline, is on board. Please join me in thanking her for her leadership and vision." The cabin fell silent. Simone remained still, her expression neutral as she felt dozens of eyes turn toward her. A few passengers began to clap, their earlier whispers now replaced with shock and admiration. Claire froze in the galley, the coffee cup in her hand trembling slightly. Her face paled as she processed the announcement. "CEO," she muttered under her breath. Mia looked at Claire, her eyes wide. "You didn't know? That's her?" Claire didn't respond. Instead, she slowly stepped out of the galley, glancing toward Simone's row. Simone didn't look at her. She was calm, composed, and unreadable, a stark contrast to Claire's growing panic. As Claire hesitated near Simone's seat, a man across the aisle spoke up. "You've been skipping her this whole flight," he said bluntly. "And now you find out she's your boss? Guess you're in trouble now." The comment cut through the tension like a knife. Claire flushed red, her usual composure slipping. She stepped closer to Simone, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ms. Wallace, I didn't realize." Simone finally looked up, her gaze sharp and steady. "You didn't realize I was the CEO," she said evenly. "But you realized I didn't deserve the same respect as everyone else. Is that correct?" Claire opened her mouth to respond but found no words. Her confident facade had crumbled entirely. The passengers around them watched in silence, their earlier discomfort replaced with a sense of justice. Simone's voice was calm but firm as she continued. "Your job is to ensure every passenger feels valued and respected. If you're unable to do that, you're not suited for this role." Claire's shoulders sagged as the weight of Simone's words settled over her. Mia, standing nearby, looked both stunned and relieved, as if Simone had voiced what she had been too afraid to say. Simone glanced toward Mia, and offered a small nod. Then she turned back to Claire. "I'll deal with this formally after the flight. For now, I suggest you reflect on your actions." Claire nodded quickly, retreating to the galley, her hands shaking as she gripped the counter. She avoided eye contact with everyone for the remainder of the flight. The rest of the flight was uneventful, though the atmosphere in the cabin had shifted entirely. Passengers stole glances at Simone, some offering small nods of respect or murmuring words of admiration. Claire kept her distance, staying in the galley or quietly assisting passengers without her earlier brisk confidence. Simone remained calm, her focus unwavering. She wasn't interested in grand displays or public confrontations. For her, it was about setting an example, not just for Claire, but for everyone watching. As the plane touched down and passengers began gathering their belongings, Simone calmly packed her notebook and briefcase. She waited patiently for the crowd to thin before standing and moving toward the exit. Claire, pale and visibly nervous, stood near the door, greeting passengers as they disembarked. When Simone approached, Claire stammered, "Miss Wallace, I'm truly sorry for—" Simone raised a hand, cutting her off. Her voice was firm but composed. "We'll discuss this in the appropriate setting," she said. "Actions have consequences, Claire. Remember that." Claire nodded silently, her eyes downcast. As Simone stepped off the plane, the captain and a member of the airline's ground crew were waiting for her. The captain, an older man with a friendly demeanor, extended his hand. "Miss Wallace, it's an honor to have you aboard. I've already forwarded your report to headquarters. We'll ensure this is handled appropriately." Simone shook his hand, her expression professional. "Thank you, Captain. I trust the team will do what's necessary. This isn't just about one employee, it's about setting a standard for how we treat our customers, no matter who they are." The ground crew member escorted Simone to a private car waiting on the tarmac. As she drove away, her thoughts lingered on the flight. It wasn't the first time she had experienced something like this, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. But every moment like this was an opportunity to create change, to make sure the next person in her position wouldn't have to endure the same. The story didn't stay on the plane. By the next morning, word had spread among the airline staff and beyond. Simone's actions became a lesson throughout the company, a clear example of accountability and leadership. Claire was called into a formal review with the HR department. While her apology was sincere, the airline's zero-tolerance policy on discriminatory behavior led to her dismissal. Mia, on the other hand, was commended for her professionalism and was later promoted to a senior role. Simone's handling of the situation inspired employees and passengers alike. For many, it was a reminder that leadership wasn't about titles or status. It was about fairness, respect, and integrity. The airline's internal policies were strengthened, ensuring that every employee received better training on diversity and inclusion.